Out of every Marvel character we come to know, I think we can all agree that Spider-Man, the Peter Parker version, is the most influential hero of them all. And like most influential comic book characters, there have been plenty of variations of the famous wall crawler, whether it's a completely different character who has taken the Spider-Man mantle, or one whose overall design is heavily inspired by the hero, such as Miles Morales, the Spider-Man from a different universe, and Izuku Midoriya, hero named Deku from My Hero Academia, and as most of you already know, both characters will be featuring in this upcoming Death Battle episode. However, even though both characters are stronger than the original Spider-Man in one way or the other, and do share similar traits, this fight should be an easy stump for Deku. Yes, I am aware at how broken most comic book characters are, I even somewhat pointed that out in my last versus analysis video, but this next death battle might be another rare case where an anime character beats a comic book character. I am also aware that there are some who say that Deku stands no chance against Miles, like this fellow YouTuber here, Dr. Splash, as he even made a video listing down most of Miles' best feats to show why. Although I do agree with some of what he said to an extent, it is not entirely right. Now, just to be clear, I'm not trying to downplay Miles' feats. Most of the stuff he did is without a doubt impressive, but certain key factors and conditions for some of those feats were clearly left out. In fact, after doing a fair bit of research myself and gaining a relatively better understanding of Miles' overall strengths and weaknesses, I am 90% sure that Deku could still win against Miles. With that being said, welcome to Animanko 9000, a channel where we talk about content related to anime, manga, and other types of media. And in this video, I'll be giving you a detailed analysis as to why Deku vs Miles Morales may not be close. Also, if you want to hear more of the contents I mentioned earlier, just subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Alright, with the intros out of the way, let's get things started by as usual first going over the character's physical stats. Beginning with their overall combat ability, I will say this that Miles might have Deku beat under this category, because even though both are all-rounded fighters who have also been trained by multiple heroes, even developing their own unique fighting style, Miles could possibly have a better and more combat experience than Deku, assuming he has been working as Spider-Man a lot longer than the latter when he had One for All. Additionally, unlike the heroes who have trained Deku, the ones who helped Miles to improve his combat prowess, even teaching him swordsmanship, are experts in hand-to-hand combat. Along with this version of Spider-Man managing to hold his own against someone like Captain America, yeah, there's no doubt that Deku will have a difficult time facing Miles head-to-head. But that's only if the former was just using 5 to maybe 20% of One for All's power. Beyond that, well, let's be real, combat alone isn't going to help Miles, especially how Deku easily outclassed him in all other physical stats, such as the case for strength and attack power. After all, despite how some of you may hate the character, it doesn't change the fact that this is the same one who, if he were to use 100% of One for All's power, was able to destroy a city-sized fortress in one strike. Miles, on the other hand, is at best comparable to Peter Parker, who's only strong enough to hold up a large building. Of course, Miles could potentially match up against Deku's power if he were to absorb enough energy, then by the time he releases all said energy, he could probably destroy a city as well. However, near the end of My Hero Academia, with only just the last embers of One for All, the power Deku emitted was so strong, he not only affected Japan's weather, but also ones that reaches as far as the US. Like seriously, with such a huge gap in strength, how does Miles stand a chance against that? Now, I do understand how some of you will argue that Miles should be a lot stronger, as he did defeat Blackheart, a villain who beat the Avengers, and faced off against Null, the god of the symbiotes. But the thing is, those feats don't really quantify him being as strong or stronger than them. In the case of Blackheart, Miles beat the villain not because of his strength, but because of his Venom Blast. And as for Null, while him punching the god was impressive, let me ask you this, did Miles defeat the symbiote god? No. Did Miles damage him? Slightly, as Null was seemingly staggered thanks to Miles' Venom Punch, but it was hardly considered a scratch to the symbiote god, especially since it wasn't even Null's real body. Plus, Null was mostly caught off guard by the punch, and later Miles had to run away from the former, knowing he can't defeat him. I also recently learned that he is facing against Hercules and Ares, but no other information of him beating the two gods was given, so I can't really count that. Point is, while these events do show how worthy Miles is as Spider-Man, as I stated earlier, it doesn't really back up his own strength, making Deku still physically stronger out of the two. Same thing when you compare each other's speed. Although I will admit, this category isn't as clear-cut considering that speed does come in two types, one being travel speed and the other being reaction speed, and for the most part, reaction speed definitely goes to Miles. Given how his reflexes are so quick, he should be able to dodge lightning like Peter Parker, and is only enhanced by his signature spider sense. However, while Miles could likely react fast enough to dodge most of Deku's attacks, I don't think the former is fast enough to fully keep up with the latter. As such, travel speed might go to Deku, and if he uses One For All's abilities, as well as the terrain he is at well enough, he could go even faster, if not so that he may eventually speed blitz Miles. Much like how Deku was able to speed blitz a moving sniper bullet, which fun fact is faster than the speed of sound, and where Miles is roughly at in terms of travel speed. I know that's hard to believe, especially since Miles has somehow found a way to also increase his speed, but given how Prime All Might was able to move as fast as Mach 10, and that's without using the other abilities of One For All, Deku should be far faster as he combines his abilities at 100% output. Seriously, don't sleep on how fast Deku is. Regardless, let's now get into each character's greatest strength, and that's their IQ. Though honestly, this one is hard to measure, and frankly you could argue that both characters are equally intelligent. Still, if we are going by academics, Miles would be the smarter one, especially when it comes to physics, which he used greatly to optimize his fire powers and during situations that requires him to outsmart his enemies. Of course, if it's battle IQ, then Deku would be the clear winner here, as we've seen a young hero coming up with different strategies and tactics in the middle of fights. It also helps that he has an in-depth knowledge of every character's abilities and skills that he has built up on from a young age, and used it to figure out ways to counter his opponent's abilities, even ones like his own. Additionally, said knowledge will only increase once he joined UA High, and after taking some inspiration of how Class 1A would fight with their quirk, he will apply some of their skills to his own, making him more efficient in combat, as well as being more creative with his abilities. Because of this, I'm sure it could allow Deku to compete against Miles' combat experience. I mean, you could disagree with this one, but I feel like Deku is more flexible when making quick decisions during fights. Still, if you want to make another argument of what could really decide the winner of this fight, then it comes down to each character's unique ability. First and foremost, I think we can all agree that Deku's smokescreen and danger sense, as well as Miles' camouflage and spider sense, aren't going to give them that big an advantage, as they do share somewhat similar functions, so both fighters could more or less find a way to counter and render them useless. Same thing, I don't think Deku's float and Miles' wall calling is going to help them that much, but they can still use them to increase their mobility. As for Deku's Black Whip, well, Miles could definitely even things out with his web shooters, since both are versatile enough to allow them to traverse around buildings, increase their agility, grab or restrain their opponent, and use them as any form of weapon. Although unlike Miles' web shooters, Deku's Black Whip is unlimited, so Miles has to be careful at how much web he is using. Nevertheless, the one ability that could likely give Deku a lot of trouble is Miles' Venom Blast, and not only for the fact that it can allow the latter to increase his strikes, emit large bursts of electrical energy, and create constructs, but by how it can greatly affect those with genetic alterations. You know, like the mutants from the X-Men series, who are the equivalent of quirk users in the My Hero verse, or just about anyone whose body is structurally different from a normal human, as was the case with Blackheart and Venom. At the same time, the question now lies in whether or not Miles' Venom Blast could affect Deku. Well, in short, probably not a lot, because you have to remember, within the canon storyline of My Hero Academia, Deku is quirkless, which essentially means that he is relatively a normal person with no powers or anything that could indicate that his body was altered. Granted, when Deku once held One For All, it did increase his physical capabilities, but besides how he needed to condition his body in order to safely use the quirk without falling apart, I don't think it's the same thing as saying that his body has suddenly changed. That being said, the Venom Blast could still affect Deku, just not as potent compared to those whose genes have been greatly altered. However, assuming that All For One did alter Deku's body, similar to how Venom would affect Eddie Brock's body, I think there are two ways that Deku could overcome the Venom Blast. One is Deku's immense pain tolerance, which he could have developed after constantly shattering his bones and muscles when overusing One For All, and allow him to keep fighting despite the pain. And through this pain tolerance, he might be able to endure the Venom Blast's ability to attack the nervous system and continue fighting like nothing happened. The next one is Deku's use of Black Whip, because assuming that Miles' Venom Blast would somehow cause Deku's body to stop moving, the young hero could take on his overlay form and force his muscles to move even if they are damaged or paralyzed, much like what happened after facing the recoil of Gear Shift. It is a bit of a stretch, but I can honestly see that happening if Death Battle were to add that in. If that's the case, then Miles could probably have nothing else to fight against Deku, including the young hero's Fajin and Gear Shift, both of which are powerful enough on their own, as one can increase Deku's power and the other can increase his speed. Plus, if Deku were to combine his abilities, like using Overdrive, then it's nearly impossible for Miles to survive. Fact is, the only thing that could give Miles a chance at victory is if he turned into his Cosmic Spider-Man form, as it allows him to manipulate matter, but based on my understanding of the form thus far, it's not possible. It's not the same as how Kyle Rayner would become the White Lantern, or Batman using the Hellbat armor. Because in order for Miles to turn into Cosmic Spider-Man, he needs to make contact with the Enigma Force, a cosmic being that Miles just can't call upon anytime. As such, the form should be inaccessible to Miles. Another chance was that one moment when he became a vampire, which made him stronger and more durable, but even that's not enough to help him win. Also, being a vampire is actually more harmful to him than his enemies. Even becoming a herald of the trickster god Anansi isn't going to help, as it doesn't seem like Miles was granted any special ability. I mean, from what I read, being a herald of Anansi seemed to only make Miles' life more challenging and difficult, rather than having the story go to his favor. At the very least, if Deku were to do a forced transfer of One For All and attack Miles' soul, like what he did to win against Shigaraki, then Anansi could maybe act to protect Miles, but that's hard to say. Honestly, the only thing left that could give Miles an advantage is his Vibranium suit, and we all know how tough Vibranium are. But chances are, Deku could probably overpower the suit, much like how he was able to overpower the main villain's reflection quirk in the film World's Heroes Mission. With all that being said and done, the way I can see this fight play out is that after Miles got teleported to the My Hero verse, both fighters are moving across the city, trying to outmaneuver each other using their overall similar abilities. Then, as things start to become more intense, Miles will begin to use more of his Venom Blast, as well as Deku using his Gear Shift and Fa Chin. Soon after, once Miles realized his regular output of the Venom Blast isn't doing much, especially how Deku would counter the former's paralyzing effects through his overlay form, Miles will try to unleash his power at maximum output, only for Deku to somehow overcome that, and then end the fight with the latter using 100% of his power. Frankly, I am mostly guessing at this point, but it could happen. But depending on how Death Battle do their research, I guess Miles could end up being the winner. Regardless, assuming that most of what I said is half right, then while I do love Miles, Deku should still be winning this fight, and after his fight with Asta, he deserves to win more. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching all the way. If you have any other factors or ideas that could tell me at who is actually winning this upcoming Death Battle fight, just leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for the next video.